Let me share something with you right at the start that might completely shift how you think about what it means to age alone. Because what I am about to walk you through is not the standard advice you have heard from your doctor, and it is not the kind of content the mainstream health industry tends to highlight. If you are a man over 60 who lives on his own, or if you love someone who does, the next several minutes could genuinely alter the direction of the years ahead. Here is what the research actually shows. Men over 65 who live alone face significantly higher risks of physical and cognitive decline compared with their partnered counterparts. That part you may have suspected, but here is the part of the same research that almost nobody talks about. The men in that group who adopted specific evidence-based lifestyle practices did not just narrow that gap. They outperformed married men their age on nearly every major health measure: strength, memory, cardiovascular endurance, emotional stability, every single one. And today I am going to take you through exactly what those practices are, ranked from the ones that will genuinely surprise you all the way up to what I consider the single most important, most scientifically validated thing an older man living alone can do for his health and his future. I want to tease one thing before we get into the countdown, because I do not want you to click away before we reach number 1. The habit I consider most critical is something that most older men are currently getting profoundly wrong. Not out of carelessness, but because they received incomplete or outdated guidance, sometimes from well-meaning doctors, sometimes from decades of conventional wisdom that the newer research has overtaken entirely. Getting this one right could add genuine, functional, independent years to your life, so stay with me all the way to the end. Before we begin, I want to ask you something directly. Drop your age in the comments right now and tell me whether you currently live alone or whether you are watching this because someone you care about does. I read every comment. This content is built specifically for you, and knowing who is in the room with me shapes everything I share here. I am Dr. James Harlow, and I have spent over 20 years working with older adults in clinical settings. I have seen what accelerated decline looks like up close, and I have seen what genuine thriving at 75 and 80 looks like. I want the latter for every man watching this. Let us get into the countdown. Coming in at number 5, and this is the one that surprises almost every patient when I bring it up for the first time, the profound, measurable, and deeply underappreciated impact of deliberate morning light exposure on the aging male body. I know what some of you are thinking. Sunlight? That is the big revelation? But I am asking you to stay with me on this because the science here is considerably more sophisticated than a simple message about going outside more. And what researchers have found specifically about men over 65 and specifically about men who live alone is remarkable enough to have changed how I counsel every patient in this demographic. Here is what is happening biologically. Your body runs on a 24-hour internal timing system called the circadian rhythm, and this system governs a staggering range of processes. When cortisol rises and falls, when testosterone is produced and how much, the timing of melatonin release, the regulation of blood pressure, body temperature, immune function, and appetite. In younger adults, the circadian rhythm is relatively robust, kept on track by a combination of light exposure, social schedules, meal timing, and physical activity cues. After the age of 65, this system begins to lose precision. It drifts the way an old watch gradually loses time. And the consequences of that drift compound over months and years in ways that are rarely traced back to their actual cause. Research examining circadian function in older men living alone has found a specific and particularly damaging vulnerability. Men in social isolation lack what researchers call Zeitgebers, which translates from German as time givers, the external social cues that anchor a circadian rhythm to a reliable schedule. When you live with a partner or family, meals happen at predictable times, conversation creates a natural daily structure, and your nervous system receives consistent social signals that help anchor your biological clock. Living alone removes most of those anchors, and the result is a gradually drifting circadian rhythm that disrupts testosterone production, impairs sleep quality, elevates inflammatory markers, and compromises the hormonal environment that keeps your body functioning properly. The most powerful single tool for recalibrating a drifting circadian rhythm is natural morning light entering the eyes within the first 90 minutes of waking. This is not light through a window. Glass filters out the specific wavelengths of light that the photoreceptors in your eyes need to send the calibration signal to the brain's master clock. It is outdoor light directly reaching your eyes, even on a cloudy day, because cloud cover still allows through the relevant wavelengths of light far more effectively than glass does. I had a patient I will call Raymond, 73 years old, retired, living alone for 3 years after his wife passed. Raymond came in complaining of fatigue, low mood, and what he described as a persistent feeling of being slightly off, like something was running out of sync that he could not identify. His blood work was largely unremarkable. His heart was strong. But Raymond's morning routine was entirely indoors. He would wake, make coffee, turn on the television, and drift through his mornings in dim, artificial light, often not going outside at all before mid-morning or later. We made one focused change. Every morning, Raymond committed to sitting on his back porch for 20 minutes within 30 minutes of waking. Coffee in hand, no phone, no screen, just natural daylight and the morning air. 6 weeks later, he told me he was sleeping more deeply than he had in years. His morning energy had returned. His mood had stabilized in a way that no supplement or medication had previously produced. The science explains exactly why. Morning light suppresses residual melatonin at the biologically correct time, triggers a precise cortisol awakening response, and initiates a hormonal cascade that improves insulin sensitivity, testosterone rhythm, and inflammatory regulation across the entire subsequent day. The practical application is simple. Within 90 minutes of waking, spend a minimum of 15 to 20 minutes outside in natural daylight. Pair this with some form of gentle movement, a short walk, light stretching on a porch, anything that combines morning light with mild physical activity. Research has shown that combining light exposure with even modest morning movement amplifies the circadian benefits significantly beyond what either habit produces alone. This is your number 5, and it is the foundation that makes everything else on this list more effective. Moving to number 4, and this one lands at the intersection of nutrition and a phenomenon called anabolic resistance that I want to explain carefully, because it is central to why so many older men living alone experience a gradual, demoralizing physical decline that they cannot fully account for, and that is rarely addressed with the specificity it deserves. Anabolic resistance is this. After approximately age 65, your muscles become significantly less responsive to protein. The biological signal that protein sends to trigger muscle maintenance and repair weakens with age. Think of it as a door that once swung open easily when protein knocked, and that has now become stiff and partially stuck. You can eat the same amount of protein you have always eaten and receive considerably less muscle building and repair benefit from it. Research on this phenomenon has found that men over 70 can require substantially more dietary protein per meal to produce the same degree of muscle protein synthesis that a 30-year-old produces from a smaller intake. And the tragedy is that most older men are eating less protein than they did at any earlier point in their lives, not more, precisely at the stage when their biological requirement has increased most. There are specific reasons why men living alone are particularly vulnerable to this deficit. Appetite tends to decrease with age. The social dimension of eating, which normally motivates larger, more nutritionally complete meals, disappears when every meal is eaten alone. Cooking for one often means simpler, faster, less protein-dense meals. And the pleasure and variety that come from shared eating, which drives better nutritional diversity, are absent. Studies examining dietary patterns in older men living alone versus those living with a partner or family have found significant gaps in daily protein intake, and that gap is directly linked to accelerated rates of sarcopenia, which is the medical term for age-related muscle loss, a condition that affects a staggering proportion of men over 80 and is directly associated with falls, fractures, loss of independence, and cognitive decline. I had a patient named George, 78 years old, former coach, someone who had been physically active his entire life and who had watched himself shrink steadily over the 4 years since he moved into his own apartment following his divorce. His shirts fit differently. He struggled to open jars. Stairs left him winded in ways they never had before. George attributed all of this to age, and he had largely stopped fighting it. When I reviewed his eating pattern, the picture was clear. George was eating most of his daily protein in a single evening meal, often a modest one at that. And the rest of his day was low in protein by any meaningful standard. We restructured his approach around a single guiding principle: distribute protein across all 3 meals rather than concentrating it at dinner. Research on protein distribution in older men has consistently found that spreading intake evenly with 30 to 40 grams of quality protein at each meal is substantially more effective at combating anabolic resistance than consuming the same total amount in 1 or 2 sittings. We are not just interested in daily totals here. We are interested in meal-level protein thresholds that trigger the muscle repair signal at each sitting. George began his mornings with eggs and Greek yogurt. Lunch became a chicken or tuna-based meal rather than whatever was convenient. Dinner included lean red meat, salmon, or another quality protein source. Within 4 months, his grip strength had measurably improved. He was opening his own jars again. He told me he felt more like himself than he had in years. The synergy pairing for this habit is omega-3 fatty acids, specifically EPA and DHA from fatty fish or a quality fish oil supplement taken with your protein-containing meals. Research has found that omega-3 fatty acids directly counteract anabolic resistance by reducing the low-grade chronic inflammation in aging muscle tissue that blunts the protein sensitivity response. Think of them as a lubricant for the stuck door, making the anabolic signal from protein meaningfully stronger. Scientific references for all of this are available in the description below. We are at number 3, and I want to pause for just a moment before continuing. If this video has given you even one piece of information you did not have before, please take 2 seconds and hit the like button right now. Subscribe if you have not already. Now let us continue, because number 3 is something I consider one of the most underappreciated findings in all of modern research on aging. The biology of sleep architecture in older men, and specifically what happens to sleep quality after 65 in ways that duration alone completely fails to capture. Most people, including many physicians, think of sleep primarily in terms of hours. But the research on older men reveals that quality and internal structure matter far more than most people understand, and that what is happening to sleep structure after 65 is one of the most important and least discussed contributors to cognitive decline and physical deterioration in this population. Your brain cycles through distinct phases of sleep repeatedly throughout the night: light sleep, deep slow wave sleep, and REM sleep. Deep sleep is where the most critical biological restoration occurs. Growth hormone is released almost exclusively during deep sleep. Cellular repair, memory consolidation, and emotional processing all happen primarily during deep sleep. And here is the alarming reality. Men lose a very large proportion of their deep sleep capacity between middle age and their mid-70s. By the time a man is in his mid-70s, many are obtaining almost no meaningful deep sleep at all, even when they believe they slept a full 7 or 8 hours. They are cycling through shallow light sleep while the restorative phases remain largely absent. Living alone compounds this considerably. Men who live alone report significantly higher rates of poor sleep quality than partnered men across every age group, but particularly after 65. Reduced feelings of physical safety keep the nervous system in a state of low-level vigilance through the night. Irregular schedules with no external structure drift the sleep and wake timing. And chronically elevated evening cortisol from perceived social isolation has no natural buffer to bring it down. The downstream consequences reach far beyond fatigue. Chronic deep sleep deficit in older men has been linked to significantly elevated risk of Alzheimer's disease, a connection explained by the discovery of the brain's glymphatic waste clearing system, which operates primarily during deep sleep, flushing toxic proteins including amyloid beta and tau from brain tissue. Without adequate deep sleep, this biological cleaning system runs far below capacity. I had a patient named Harold, 70 years old, retired accountant, someone who told me with complete confidence that he had no sleep problems. He fell asleep without difficulty, stayed asleep, and clocked 7 hours consistently. But when we did a proper sleep analysis, Harold's deep sleep was virtually absent. He was cycling through the lightest phases all night and waking up exhausted, mentally foggy, and emotionally flat in ways he had started attributing to getting older. We made 3 targeted changes. We moved his evening meal 2 hours earlier, since eating within 3 hours of bedtime significantly disrupts deep sleep architecture. We lowered his bedroom temperature to the mid to upper 60-degree Fahrenheit range, which research has found specifically promotes slow-wave sleep in older men by facilitating the core body temperature drop that deep sleep requires. And we established his morning light and movement routine, which directly feeds into nighttime deep sleep quality through its effect on circadian regulation. 8 weeks later, Harold described the difference as transformative. His mind was clearer. He was waking up with genuine energy rather than simply getting through his day. One supplemental tool worth mentioning: magnesium glycinate taken approximately 45 minutes before bed in a dose around 300 milligrams has been shown in clinical research to improve both sleep onset and deep sleep duration in older adults through its activation of the parasympathetic nervous system. Consistent sleep and wake times, including on weekends, compound the benefit substantially over time. We are at number 2, and I want to remind you that I flagged this one early because it involves a biological reality that most mainstream health content for older men does not address with the specificity or urgency it deserves. Number 2 is about strength training, and specifically about a phenomenon called fast twitch muscle fiber loss that is arguably one of the most important things an older man living alone can understand about his own body. Your muscles contain two broad categories of fibers. Slow twitch fibers support endurance activities, the kind of sustained, low-intensity effort involved in walking, standing, and maintaining posture throughout the day. Fast twitch fibers are responsible for power, speed, and the kind of rapid explosive force that catches you when you trip, pushes you up from the floor if you fall, lets you carry groceries without staggering, and gives your body the reflexive capacity to respond to unexpected physical demands. After the age of 60, men lose fast twitch muscle fibers at a rate substantially faster than they lose slow twitch fibers. By the mid-70s, some men have lost a very significant proportion of their fast twitch fiber population entirely. These fibers do not just weaken gradually, they disappear. This is the biology behind why falls become so dangerous for older men, and it is a mechanism that the standard advice to walk more and stay active almost entirely fails to address. Walking is excellent for slow twitch fiber maintenance. It does virtually nothing for fast twitch preservation. When you begin to trip, it is your fast twitch fibers that fire in milliseconds to generate the corrective force that restores your balance. If those fibers have substantially declined, the correction simply does not happen quickly or powerfully enough, and a stumble becomes a fall. What the research on preserving fast twitch fibers has found is that resistance training done with intentional speed and force during the effort phase specifically recruits and maintains fast twitch fibers in a way that slow, casual movement cannot replicate. The key phrase is intentional speed. Even with modest resistance, even with body weight movements, performing the effort phase, the standing up from a squat, the pushing in a wall push-off, the stepping up onto a surface with deliberate force and intention sends the neurological signal to the fast twitch fibers that activates and preserves them. The weight involved matters far less than the intent to move powerfully. I had a patient named Walter, 69 years old, retired, someone who walked 4 miles a day without fail and who considered himself in good shape for his age. Walter had a fall, tripping on a slightly uneven section of sidewalk on an otherwise ordinary afternoon. He came to see me shaken, not just by the fall itself, but by the speed at which it had happened before he could react. We assessed his cardiovascular fitness, which was genuinely excellent. Then we looked at his reactive power and fast twitch function. There was the gap. We added 2 resistance training sessions per week to his routine. Not intense, not extreme, but focused on compound movements performed with deliberate speed and intention. Sit-to-stand movements done quickly and powerfully. Step-ups onto a low surface. Wall push-offs. Within 3 months, Walter's reactive balance had improved substantially. He told me he felt what he described as planted again, like the ground was working with him instead of against him. The practical prescription here is 2 sessions per week of resistance training focused on compound movements involving multiple joints, performed with deliberate speed during the effort phase. This is your minimum effective dose, and it is achievable for nearly any man over 60 regardless of current fitness level. Pair this with the protein strategy from number 4. Consuming 30 to 40 grams of quality protein within 2 hours after each resistance session specifically amplifies muscle fiber repair in older men in a way that no other timing window replicates as effectively. These 2 habits together are the most powerful physical health pairing available to an older man living alone. And now number 1. The single most surprising, most impactful, and most scientifically validated fact about older men living alone. The one that reaches into the biology of every other item on this list, and that most mainstream medicine still fails to address with the directness and urgency the evidence demands. Number 1 is the biology of social connection, and specifically the measurable, quantifiable, cellular level physical damage that chronic loneliness inflicts on the aging male body. I want to be very clear about what I mean here. This is not a conversation about emotions. This is not a discussion about mood or mental health in the conventional sense. This is hard biology. It is gene expression, inflammatory chemistry, and molecular aging, and it is among the most striking findings in all of modern gerontology. When the brain of an older man living in social isolation perceives chronic loneliness, it does not simply respond with sadness or low mood. It activates a specific biological program that researchers have been able to identify at the level of gene expression. Loneliness changes which genes in your immune cells are switched on and off. It turns up genes associated with chronic inflammation and immune overactivation, and it turns down genes associated with antiviral defense and tissue repair. Your body shifts from a state of restoration and maintenance into a state of chronic defensive alertness, and it remains in that state as long as the social isolation persists, consuming resources, accelerating cellular aging, and systematically undermining every other health behavior you engage in. The cellular aging effects are specific enough to measure. Loneliness accelerates the shortening of telomeres, which are the protective caps on the ends of your DNA strands. Telomere length is one of the most reliable biological markers of cellular age, and research has found that chronically lonely older men show telomere shortening equivalent to several additional years of biological aging compared to socially connected men of the same chronological age. The same man living alone in social isolation versus surrounded by meaningful connection is aging faster at the level of his DNA. This effect also compounds with the other vulnerabilities on this list in a specific way. Loneliness elevates evening cortisol, directly worsening the sleep architecture problems from number 3. It reduces appetite and the motivation to cook, directly compounding the protein deficit from number 4. It disrupts circadian anchoring, making the morning light habit from number 5 less effective by removing the social zeitgebers that reinforce it. And it removes the motivation and accountability that make the resistance training from number 2 sustainable over time. Loneliness does not simply add to the health risks of aging alone, it multiplies them. There is also a specific and important reason why older men are particularly vulnerable to this effect compared to older women. Research on social networks in later life has consistently found that older men tend to have significantly narrower social networks than older women of the same age, and that this difference becomes dramatically more pronounced after retirement and spousal loss. Women typically maintain broader, more independently constructed friendship networks. Men, across study after study, report their wife or partner as their primary confidant, their most important social connection, often their only truly intimate one. When that relationship ends through death, divorce, or distance, many men find themselves in a form of social impoverishment that they lack both the vocabulary and the cultural permission to describe or seek help for. They have been socialized to frame independence as a virtue and need as a weakness, which makes the specific social vulnerability of their situation invisible to them at precisely the moment it is doing the most biological damage. I had a patient named Thomas, 77 years old, former engineer, someone who was genuinely sharp, self-sufficient, and justifiably proud of his ability to manage his life alone after losing his wife 4 years earlier. His children lived in different states. Thomas was getting through each day competently, but he was averaging fewer than 2 meaningful social interactions per week and had been for over 3 years. His inflammatory blood markers were elevated well beyond what his age alone would suggest. His sleep was fragmented. He had lost significant weight without deliberately dieting. He told me he was fine. He was not fine. His body was telling a different story than his words were. We did not prescribe medication. We prescribed social contact with the same specificity we would apply to any other treatment. Thomas joined a weekly session at a local workshop that ran free woodworking sessions for retired men. Not because woodworking was the point, connection was the point. The shared purpose, the regular schedule, the names and faces that became familiar, these were the medicine. Within 6 months, Thomas had rebuilt significant lean mass. His inflammatory markers had dropped meaningfully. And he said something to me that I have thought about often since. He said that he had forgotten what it felt like to matter to people. The practical guidance here is specific. Research has identified a minimum threshold of social interaction that protects against the biological consequences of loneliness in older men. 3 to 5 meaningful social contacts per week, whether in person, by phone, or by video call, with people who know you by name and who genuinely care about your answer when they ask how you are doing. Frequency and regularity matter more than duration. 5 brief, genuine interactions distributed across the week are more protective than a single long one because your nervous system needs consistent signals of social safety arriving regularly to regulate the inflammatory and cortisol responses that loneliness drives. 1 weekly phone call leaves 6 days during which the biology of isolation is operating unchecked. The synergy with everything else on this list is the reason social connection holds the number 1 position. Cortisol regulation from regular social contact improves the circadian rhythm addressed in number 5. Social eating creates natural protein distribution opportunities that address number 4. The drop in evening cortisol that comes from regular social connection directly improves the deep sleep architecture problems from number 3. And social accountability and shared activity make the resistance training from number 2 far more likely to actually happen and continue over time. Social connection is not simply one factor among 5. It is the biological foundation upon which all the others rest more effectively when it is present. I want to close by speaking to you directly, man to man, with the full weight of everything I have seen in 2 decades of clinical work with this population. Living alone is not a sentence. It is not a biological verdict. The research I have shared with you today is not there to frighten you. It is a map of the specific terrain you are navigating so that you can move through it with intention and intelligence rather than simply hoping for the best. Every single one of the 5 things we covered is actionable beginning tomorrow. Morning light exposure is free and takes 15 minutes. Protein distribution requires planning but not perfection. Sleep structure can be meaningfully improved with targeted changes that cost nothing. Resistance training at its effective minimum requires only 2 sessions per week. And social connection, the hardest one for many men to prioritize, is the one where even a small, deliberate investment produces biological returns that nothing else on this list can fully replicate. The men I have watched thrive into their 80s and beyond are not the ones with the best genetics or the most resources. They are the ones who decided deliberately that their life was worth investing in, that it was not too late, and that each morning was an opportunity to send their body different signals than the ones that lead toward decline. That decision is available to you right now. If this video gave you something real today, please subscribe if you have not already, and leave me a comment below telling me your age and which of these 5 facts hit you hardest. I read every single comment, and your words shape what comes next.